Welcome to Tales by Imon. Tonight, we journey to a place whispered about in hushed tones, a place that the maps seem to forget and travelers unknowingly avoid. We're venturing into the heart of an American mystery, a story of a town called Hollow Creek and the chilling question that hangs in the dense fog surrounding it. What happened to its last resident? The old saying goes that some roads are best left untraveled. I never much believed in that. To me, a road was just a means to an end, a stretch of asphalt and forgotten stories. But the road to Hollow Creek, that was different. It felt less like a path and more like a warning. My name is Ethan Hayes, and I'm a journalist, or at least I was, before my obsession with the forgotten corners of the country led me here. My current investigation, the one that had consumed the last 6 months of my life, was the disappearance of my estranged uncle, a man named Jeremiah. He was a folklorist, a chaser of ghosts and local legends. His last known letter, postmarked from a town that barely registered on any modern GPS, was my only lead. The town of Hollow Creek. The drive itself was a descent into isolation. The further I drove, the more the modern world seemed to peel away. Cell service vanished first, the reassuring bars on my phone winking out one by one until I was left with a useless brick of glass and metal. Then the radio stations dissolved into static, the cheerful pop songs and loud commercials replaced by a persistent, high-pitched hiss that felt like the sound of emptiness itself. The trees, ancient and gnarled, pressed in on the narrow two-lane road, their branches forming a dense canopy that blotted out the afternoon sun, casting the world in a perpetual twilight. Moss hung from the limbs like old men's beards, and the air grew thick and heavy with a smell of damp earth and decay. When I finally saw the faded, splintered sign that read, "Welcome to Hollow Creek, population," the question marks felt less like a quirky local joke and more like a genuine admission of uncertainty. The town was a collection of dilapidated buildings huddled together as if for warmth against the encroaching wilderness. A gas station with pumps that looked like they hadn't been used since the Carter administration, a general store with windows so grimy they were nearly opaque, and a handful of houses with peeling paint and sagging porches. An unnerving silence hung over the place. No dogs barking, no children playing, no hum of distant traffic. Just the whisper of the wind through the skeletal branches of the trees. I pulled my car up to the general store, the only place that showed any sign of life. A single, flickering fluorescent light cast a sickly yellow glow from within. The bell above the door let out a rusty, mournful jangle as I stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of dust, old wood, and something else, something faintly metallic and unsettling, like old blood. Behind the counter stood a man who looked as ancient as the town itself. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes a pale, watery blue that seemed to look right through me. He was wiping down the already clean counter with a slow, methodical rhythm. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to stir the dust motes dancing in the air. "I hope so," I said, trying for a friendly tone that felt foreign in this oppressive atmosphere. "I'm looking for someone. Jeremiah Hayes. He would have been here about 6 months ago." A tall man, graying hair, usually carrying a leather-bound journal. The old man's hand paused its wiping for a fraction of a second, the only break in his steady rhythm. "He didn't look up. Don't know the name. He was a writer," I pressed on, pulling a photograph from my jacket pocket. "Studying local folklore. He sent a letter from here." I slid the picture across the counter. It was a picture of Jeremiah, smiling, the crow's feet around his eyes crinkling with a life that felt a world away from this place. The man glanced at the photo, his expression unreadable. "Folklore," he repeated, the word sounding strange in his mouth. "Ain't no folklore here. Just history." "What kind of history?" I asked, my reporter's instincts kicking in despite the growing unease in the pit of my stomach. He finally looked up, his pale eyes meeting mine. "The kind that's best left buried. You a relative of his. His nephew." The old man let out a long, slow sigh, a sound like leaves skittering across pavement. He pushed the photograph back towards me. "Some things, son, are like a tangled knot. The more you pull at a loose string, the tighter the knot gets. My advice: get back in your car and drive. Don't stop until you see a sky that ain't gray." Before I could respond, the bell above the door jangled again. A younger woman, though her face was etched with a weariness that belied her years, stepped inside. She had dark, tangled hair and eyes that darted around nervously. She nodded curtly at the old man and then her gaze fell on me. A flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher. Fear? Recognition? Crossed her face before she quickly looked away. "Just came for some kerosene, Elias," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The old man, Elias, nodded slowly and disappeared into a back room. The woman stood by the counter, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, refusing to meet my gaze. I don't mean to pry, I said, my voice softer than I intended, but I'm really trying to find my uncle. Any information would be helpful. She finally looked at me, her dark eyes wide and haunted. You shouldn't have come here, she whispered, her words tumbling out in a rush. This place, it holds on to things. People. Stories. It doesn't like outsiders asking questions. Questions about what? She shook her head, a frantic, jerky motion. About the quiet. About the empty houses. About the last resident. The last resident? I echoed, the phrase from the town sign echoing in my mind. Who was that? Elias returned with a can of kerosene, his heavy boots thudding on the wooden floor. The woman flinched at the sound. She quickly paid, her hands trembling as she exchanged the money. Without another word, she hurried out of the store, the rusty bell marking her departure. I was left alone with Elias and the suffocating silence. He stared at me, his expression a mixture of pity and something that looked unervingly like resignation. Like I said, he rasped, a tangled knot. I bought a map of the local area, a faded hand-drawn thing that looked decades old. As I was about to leave, my hand on the door, Elias spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. Your uncle, he was asking the same questions you are. He was looking for the old Blackwood place. Up on the ridge. Said the answers were there. He paused, and a shiver I couldn't explain traced its way down my spine. No one's lived in that house for 50 years. Not since the last of the Blackwoods vanished. I walked out of the store into the unnaturally dim afternoon. The wind had picked up, rustling the dead leaves that littered the cracked pavement. My uncle had been here. He had been asking questions. And he had been looking for a house that had been empty for half a century. The knot was already tightening. I looked at the hand-drawn map. A small, crudely drawn square on the highest ridge was labeled Blackwood Estate. It was a place to start. A place to pull on that loose string. As I got into my car, a crow landed on the hood, its black eyes fixing on me with an unnerving intelligence. It let out a single harsh caw before taking flight, disappearing into the gray, oppressive sky. The sound echoed in the silent town, a lonely, foreboding welcome. I knew then that leaving Hollow Creek was no longer an option. Not until I found out what happened to my uncle, and what secrets the last resident of this forgotten town had taken with them into the silence. The crow's cry seemed to cling to me as I drove away from the general store, a final, grating punctuation mark on Elias's warning. The hand-drawn map was spread across the passenger seat, its delicate, faded lines a stark contrast to the unyielding wilderness that surrounded me. The road leading up to the ridge wasn't paved. It was little more than a dirt track, a scar carved into the hillside, half-healed by time and neglect. My sedan protested, its tires spinning in the loose gravel and scraping against unseen rocks, but I pushed it onward, fueled by a stubbornness that now felt dangerously close to obsession. The forest grew denser here, the trees crowding the path like silent, judgmental onlookers. Their bark was a sickly, pale gray, and their branches twisted into agonized shapes, clawing at the sky. A thick, cloying fog began to roll down from the ridge, snaking between the tree trunks and blanketing the road in a disorienting white shroud. I had to slow to a crawl, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my headlights barely penetrating the gloom. Twice, I saw movement at the edge of the light, a quick, shadowy flicker that was there one moment and gone the next. A deer, I told myself. It had to be a deer, but my heart hammered against my ribs, unconvinced. The woods felt awake, and they were watching. After what felt like an hour of tense, crawling ascent, the track leveled out and opened into a clearing. And there it was. The Blackwood Estate. Elias had said it was empty for 50 years, but empty wasn't the right word. Forsaken felt more appropriate. It wasn't a grand mansion, but a two-story farmhouse built in a severe, Gothic style that seemed utterly out of place in these woods. It stood on a small rise, a dark silhouette against the roiling gray fog. The roof sagged in the middle, like the spine of some great, dead beast. Windows, like vacant eyes, stared out from behind a curtain of ivy, many of them shattered, leaving jagged, black-toothed maws. A wide, wraparound porch listed to one side, its wooden pillars rotted through, looking as though a strong gust of wind could bring the whole thing crashing down. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. It pressed in on me, heavy and absolute. I sat for a long moment, just staring at the house, a cold dread seeping into my bones. This place was wrong. It felt saturated with a deep, ancient sadness, a sense of loss so profound it was almost a physical presence. This was where my uncle's search had led him. I had to know why. Getting out of the car, the air was surprisingly cold, carrying the scent of wet rot and something else, something faintly sweet and cloying, like wilting flowers. The front gate, a twisted wreck of rusted iron, hung from a single hinge. I pushed it open, and it groaned in protest, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet. The path to the front door was completely overgrown, buried beneath a tangle of weeds and thorny vines that snagged at my jeans. As I drew closer, I noticed strange details. The ivy covering the house wasn't just growing randomly. It seemed to form patterns, spiraling around the window frames in a way that felt deliberate, almost intelligent. And there, half hidden beneath the crumbling steps of the porch, was a small object. I knelt down, my fingers brushing away the damp soil and dead leaves. It was a small, tin soldier, the paint almost completely worn away. Its tiny rifle was bent, and its face was a featureless nub of corroded metal. A child's toy, left behind in a place no child had called home for half a century. I pocketed it, the cold metal a strange comfort in my hand. The front door was a solid slab of dark wood, swollen and warped by years of damp. A heavy iron knocker in the shape of a raven's head was fixed to the center. It was locked, of course. I circled the house, my feet crunching on the dead leaves and fallen debris. The back of the house was in even worse shape. Part of the rear wall had collapsed inward, revealing a dark, gaping hole that led into what looked like a kitchen. But it was something on the ground near the collapsed wall that stopped me cold. Footprints. Several sets of them, pressed into the soft, damp earth. They were fresh, recent. Most were from heavy boots, but one set was smaller, more slender. And they were muddled, overlapping, as if there had been a struggle. My blood ran cold. Someone else had been here. And not long ago. Was it my uncle? Had he come back? Or had someone else followed his trail here? The warnings from Elias and the nervous woman in the store echoed in my head. This place holds on to things. The desire to turn back, to get in my car and just drive, was immense. It was a primal, instinctual urge for self-preservation. But the thought of Jeremiah, of the unanswered questions, of the fresh tracks in the mud, it was stronger. I had to go inside. Taking a deep breath to steady my nerves, I clambered over the rubble of the collapsed wall and dropped into the darkness of the house. The air inside was stagnant and thick with the smell of mold and decay. What little light filtered in through the grimy windows revealed a scene of utter dereliction. The kitchen was a nightmare of rotting cabinets, peeling wallpaper, and a floor covered in a thick layer of dust and fallen plaster. A rusted wood-burning stove stood cold in the corner, its iron door hanging open like a silent scream. Everything was covered in that same thick, undisturbed layer of dust. Everything, except for one thing. On the far side of the room, a door leading deeper into the house stood slightly ajar, and on the dusty floor in front of it was a single, clear line. A drag mark. Something or someone had been dragged from this kitchen into the rest of the house. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. My logical mind was screaming at me to get out, to call the police, to do anything but go further. But the journalist, the nephew, the fool who had come this far, couldn't stop. I pulled out the small flashlight from my pocket. Its beam cut a nervous, trembling path through the gloom. I pushed the door open. It swung inward with a low, agonizing creak that seemed to echo through the entire silent house. The hallway beyond was pitch black. I stepped through the doorway, my flashlight beam dancing over peeling floral wallpaper and a grand, dust-shrouded staircase leading to the upper floor. As I took another step, my foot kicked something on the floor. I aimed the light down. It wasn't a rock or a piece of fallen wood. It was a book. A leather-bound journal. It was scuffed and damp, but I recognized it instantly. The embossed initials on the cover confirmed it. J.H. Jeremiah Hayes. It was my uncle's journal. It was open, its pages warped and stained. As I bent down to pick it up, a faint sound drifted down from the floor above me. A soft, rhythmic creaking. Like a rocking chair, moving back and forth, in a room that was supposed to be empty. The world seemed to shrink to the small, trembling circle of my flashlight beam and the sound from upstairs. Creak, groan, creak, groan. It was a steady, lulling rhythm, a sound that should have been comforting. But in the crushing silence of this dead house, it was a profound violation. It was the sound of something impossible. My fingers trembled as I picked up my uncle's journal. The damp leather felt cold and alien. The pages were stiff, and the ink on the open page was smeared in places, as if rain, or tears, had fallen on it. Jeremiah's handwriting, normally a neat, academic script, was a frantic scrawl, the words practically clawing their way off the page. I angled the flashlight to read. October 17th. They never left. None of them. The town thinks the Blackwoods just vanished, that the last one, the boy, simply walked into the woods and was gone. But that's the story they tell themselves so they can sleep. The truth is in the roots of this house, in the soil. It's a lullaby sung to the lost. She sings it to keep them here. She won't let them go. Hollow Creek isn't a place you leave. It's a place you become a part of. I've seen him, the boy with the soldier. He tries to warn people, but no one listens. They can't hear him over her song. I hear it now. So beautiful. So sad. She knows I'm here. She knows I've found her room. The entry ended there, the last sentence trailing off into a jagged, inky line. A chill that had nothing to do with the cold air of the house spiderwebbed across my skin. She sings it to keep them here. The boy with the soldier. My fingers instinctively went to my pocket, closing around the cold, bent piece of tin. The rhythmic creaking from above continued its maddening beat, a punctuation mark to my uncle's terrifying last words. She knows I've found her room. Was this the room he meant? My fear was a living thing, a cold knot in my gut, but my uncle's words had changed everything. This wasn't just a search for a missing person anymore. It was a rescue. I had to know what he'd found. I had to understand. Clutching the journal in one hand and the flashlight in the other, I turned towards the grand staircase. Each step groaned under my weight, the sound echoing in the cavernous space. Dust rained down from the rafters above, dancing like tiny ghosts in my flashlight beam. I imagined my uncle making this same ascent, drawn upward by the same impossible sound. Had he been as terrified as I was? The upstairs hallway was a gallery of shadows. The floral wallpaper was darker up here, stained with long black streaks of mold that looked like weeping wounds. The doors to the bedrooms stood like silent tombstones, most of them closed. But one, at the very end of the hall, was slightly ajar. The creaking was louder now, clearer, emanating from beyond that door. I moved slowly, deliberately, my sneakers making no sound on the dusty floorboards. The air grew colder as I approached the open door, the sweet, cloying scent of decay more potent. I reached the doorway, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the back of my throat. I could see a slice of the room within, a wall with peeling wallpaper patterned with faded yellow ducklings, and a window, its glass intact, looking out into the impenetrable fog. Taking a shuddering breath, I pushed the door open. The room was a child's nursery. A heavy wooden crib stood against one wall, its bars casting long, cage-like shadows. A collection of antique wooden toys, a set of blocks and a small pull-string dog, sat on a dusty shelf, untouched. And in the center of the room, directly in my line of sight, was a simple, wooden rocking chair. It was moving. It rocked back and forth on its own, its runners whispering against the bare wood of the floor. Creak, groan. There was no breeze from the window, no trick of the light, no rational explanation. It just moved, propelled by an unseen force, an invisible occupant lost in a sorrowful, unending rhythm. I stood frozen in the doorway, my mind struggling to process what my eyes were seeing. This was it. The impossible thing. The heart of the house's wrongness. My uncle's words came back to me. I found her room. Was this her room? The woman who sings the lullaby? Or was this the room of the boy with the soldier? My flashlight beam swept past the rocking chair, across the floor, and up the far wall. And then I saw them. Scratched into the plaster beneath the window, etched with what looked like a nail or a sharp stone, were names. Dozens of them, crammed together in a chaotic, desperate list. I saw names I didn't recognize. Thomas, Samuel, Peter, Eli. But near the bottom of the list, clearly etched and deeper than the others, was a name that made the air freeze in my lungs. Jeremiah Hayes. My uncle's name. It was a gravestone, carved into the very wall of this house. My eyes followed the list of names, a macabre roll call of the lost. Then I saw, just below my uncle's name, a fresh set of scratches. The plaster was lighter, the dust still clinging to the edges. A new name had been added to the list, written in a shaky, childlike script. A name that had no business being there. A name that couldn't possibly be there. It was my name, Ethan. The rocking chair stopped. The sudden, absolute silence that followed was more terrifying than the sound itself. It was a heavy, expectant silence. And from the dark, empty corner of the nursery, just beyond the crib, came a new sound. The soft, whispered giggle of a child. Time itself seemed to fracture in that single, horrifying moment. The sight of my own name carved into the wall, the abrupt, deafening silence, the ghostly giggle from the corner. It was a trinity of pure dread that bypassed all rational thought and shot straight into the primal core of my brain. Every instinct, every nerve ending, screamed a single, silent word: run. But I was paralyzed, pinned in place by a terror so absolute it felt like a physical weight. My flashlight beam, shaking violently in my hand, drifted from my name on the wall towards the corner where the giggle had originated. The beam cut through the thick, ancient dust motes and landed on a small shape slowly coalescing out of the oppressive darkness. It was a boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, and he was translucent, his form shimmering like a heat haze on a summer road. He wore old-fashioned clothes, knickerbockers and a worn, button-up shirt. His face was pale and etched with a sadness so profound it seemed to anchor him to this room. In his spectral hand, he clutched a small object. A tin soldier. It was the boy from my uncle's journal. He didn't look at me with malice. His eyes, large and dark in his pale face, were filled with an urgent, pleading terror. He raised his free hand, his small shimmering fingers pointing frantically towards the list of names on the wall, then to me, then to the door. The message was clear. A desperate, silent warning screamed across the gulf between the living and the dead. You have to get out. You're next. As my eyes met his, the room around me began to dissolve. The peeling wallpaper, the dust, the decay, it all melted away. For a dizzying second, the room was new. Sunlight streamed through a clean window, illuminating warm, polished floors. The crib was adorned with a handmade quilt, and the air was filled not with the scent of rot, but with the smell of laundry soap and baking bread. The rocking chair was moving again, but this time, it was occupied. A woman with dark hair pinned up sat in the chair, her back to me, gently rocking the small boy, the living boy, who was nestled in her lap. She was humming. It was a simple, sweet lullaby, a melody of pure love and comfort that seemed to resonate deep in my bones. I could feel the boy's contentment, his absolute safety in his mother's arms. It was a perfect, sun-drenched memory. And then it soured. The sunlight outside the window abruptly vanished, plunging the memory into a cold, gray twilight. The lullaby continued, but the woman's humming began to warp, the notes sliding off key, becoming a discordant, mournful dirge. The feeling of love and safety evaporated, replaced by a suffocating sense of possessiveness, of a love that had curdled into something monstrous and smothering. The woman's head turned slowly, unnaturally, over her shoulder. I couldn't see her face, only a void of shadow where her features should have been, but I could feel her gaze, cold, proprietary, and utterly without mercy. The boy in her lap began to struggle, his small body tense with a silent, desperate fear. The humming grew louder, more distorted, a sound of madness and sorrow that clawed at the edges of my hearing. The vision shattered. I was back in the decaying nursery, the ghost of the boy shimmering before me, his face a mask of terror. The humming didn't stop. The warped lullaby lingered, no longer in my head but in the room itself, seeming to bleed from the very walls. The air grew impossibly cold, my breath misting in the beam of my flashlight. The door to the hallway, which I had left wide open, slammed shut with a deafening boom that shook the entire house. The ghostly boy flinched, his translucent form flickering violently, like a dying candle flame. He gave me one last, desperate look, his mouth opening in a silent scream, and then he simply dissolved, vanishing back into the shadows he had emerged from. I was alone. Alone with her. The humming was all around me now, a predatory sound that vibrated through the floorboards and rattled in my teeth. It was the song my uncle had heard. The lullaby sung to the lost. And it was wrapping itself around me. A sudden, inexplicable wave of exhaustion washed over me, a deep, bone-weary fatigue. My knees felt weak. It would be so easy to just sit down, to just stay. The thought was seductive, inviting. Stay. Become a part of the story. Rest. No. The name on the wall. My name. It was a jolt of pure adrenaline. This was how she took them. She sang them to sleep. Forever. I scrambled backwards, stumbling out of the nursery and slamming into the now-closed door. I fumbled with the old brass knob, my fingers slick with sweat. It wouldn't turn. It was stuck, or held. Panic, hot and sharp, pierced through the supernatural cold. I threw my shoulder against the door. Once. Twice. On the third try, there was a crack of splintering wood and the door flew open. I didn't look back. I sprinted down the hallway, the discordant lullaby chasing me, echoing from every doorway I passed. Whispers erupted from the walls around me, a chorus of faint, sorrowful voices calling the names carved in the nursery. Thomas. Samuel. Jeremiah. It was the sound of a choir of trapped souls. I half fell, half tumbled down the main staircase, landing hard on the dusty floor of the foyer. The house groaned around me, a long, guttural sound of displeasure. I scrambled to my feet, my only thought to get to the collapsed wall in the kitchen, to get back out into the fog, into the real world. I burst into the kitchen and clawed my way over the rubble, not caring about the scrapes and bruises. Then, I was outside. I fell to my knees on the damp, cold earth, gasping, sucking in the thick, foggy air. It felt cleaner, purer, than the stagnant poison inside the house. The humming stopped. The whispers ceased. There was only the sound of my own ragged breathing and the frantic thumping of my heart. After a moment, I pushed myself to my feet, my entire body trembling. I had the journal. I was alive. I backed away from the house, my eyes locked on it, unable to turn away from the thing that had almost claimed me. And that's when I saw her. In the upstairs window of the nursery, the one with the faded yellow ducklings on the wall, a figure stood in the darkness. It was a silhouette, tall and slender, the shape of a woman. She was standing perfectly still, her form framed by the decaying window, looking directly down at me. I couldn't see her face, but I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of her ancient, malevolent gaze. She had let me go. For now. She was showing me that she was in control. The Blackwood estate hadn't just held a memory, it held a warden. And I had just met the last resident of Hollow Creek. I didn't wait for the figure in the window to move. I didn't wait for another sound to bleed from the walls of that cursed house. I scrambled into my car, my hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life with a startling violence that momentarily drowned out the frantic beating of my own heart. I slammed the car into reverse, spitting gravel and dirt, and spun the wheel, not caring about the path, only about putting as much distance as possible between myself and the Blackwood estate. The drive back down the ridge was a blur of panicked instinct. The fog seemed thicker, more malicious, its tendrils wrapping around my car as if trying to hold me back. Twisted branches scraped against the windows like skeletal fingers. Every shadow in my peripheral vision was the woman from the window. Every gust of wind against the car was the whisper of her corrupted lullaby. I gripped my uncle's journal on the passenger seat like a holy relic, the only tangible proof that I wasn't going insane, that the horrors I had just witnessed were real. When I finally hit the paved road at the bottom of the ridge, a wave of relief so intense it was dizzying washed over me. I pulled over, my whole body trembling with the adrenaline crash, and just breathed. But the relief was short-lived. I had escaped the house, yes, but I hadn't escaped Hollow Creek. Her gaze was burned into my mind. I could still feel it on me, a cold, possessive weight. My name was on her wall. I was one of her chosen. The knot Elias had spoken of was no longer just tangled. It was a noose, and it was tightening around my neck. There was only one person in this forsaken town who had shown even a sliver of knowledge. I drove back through the silent streets, the setting sun doing little to burn away the oppressive gray gloom, and pulled up once again in front of the general store. The flickering fluorescent light within seemed less like a beacon and more like the last ember of a dying fire. The bell above the door let out the same mournful jangle as I stormed inside, the journal clutched in my hand. Elias was right where I had left him, wiping down the same spotless counter. He looked up as I entered, and for the first time, his placid wrinkled face showed a flicker of something new. It wasn't surprise. It was resignation, laced with a deep, weary sorrow. "You went up there," he said. It wasn't a question. His pale eyes drifted to the journal in my hand. "And you found what he left behind." "I found his name scratched on a wall, next to a dozen others," I said, my voice hoarse and raw. I slammed the journal down on the counter. "I found my name right underneath his. And I saw her." Elias flinched at that, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. He let out a long sigh, the sound of a man surrendering to a battle he'd been fighting his entire life. He finally put down his rag. "Then I reckon there's no more point in keeping quiet," he said, his gravelly voice low. He gestured to a pair of dusty stools by the counter. "Sit. If you're on her list, running won't do you any good." "Not yet." I sat, my legs still unsteady. Elias leaned against the shelves behind him, the cans of beans and faded boxes of crackers a surreal backdrop for the ghost story I was now living. "This town," he began, "it doesn't just have history. It has a scar. And the Blackwood estate is where the wound was made. The woman you saw, that was Alara Blackwood. 50 years ago, she was just a mother. A little too protective, maybe. Her whole world was her son, Nathaniel." "The boy with the soldier," I whispered, the image of the sad, shimmering ghost flashing in my mind. Elias nodded grimly. "The very same. One autumn afternoon, Nathaniel was playing in the woods behind the house and he got lost. A storm rolled in. The whole town searched for 3 days. They found his little tin soldier by the creek, but they never found the boy. The loss broke something in Alara. She refused to believe he was gone. She'd wander the woods at all hours, humming the lullaby she used to sing to him, trying to call him home." He paused, his eyes looking past me, into a memory. "Grief is a powerful thing, son. In a place like this, a place already thin with sorrow, it can take root. Her grief, it poisoned the land. She died in that house a year later, Folks say of a broken heart. But she never left. And her sorrow, it grew into a hunger. She couldn't have her son back, so she started collecting others. Collecting. Anyone who dies in these woods, anyone who gets lost in the fog, anyone foolish enough to go looking for answers in her house. She keeps them, Elias explained, his voice barely a whisper. Their spirits get tangled up in her lullaby. She adds them to her sad little family, thinking they can replace the one she lost. They become her children. Trapped. The names on that wall are her collection. The last resident of Hollow Creek isn't a person. It's a ghost. A warden. The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture more terrifying than I could have imagined. My uncle hadn't just disappeared. He'd been collected. And now, she wanted me. Why me? I demanded. What did I do? You're a haze, Elias said simply, as if that explained everything. Your family has old roots in this valley, deeper than you know. That's a story for another time. What matters now is that she's seen you. She's claimed you. Her influence isn't just in that house. It's in the fog. It's in the trees. You try to drive out of this valley, and the fog will get so thick you'll drive in circles. The road will seem to twist back on itself. You'll hear her song on the wind, and you'll feel that terrible urge to just sleep. A wave of helplessness washed over me. I was trapped. I had walked into a cage without even seeing the bars. Just then, the bell on the door jangled again. It was the woman from before, the one with the haunted eyes. She rushed in, her face pale and frantic, clutching a kerosene lamp. Elias, it's getting worse, she said, her voice trembling. The fog is rolling in thick off the ridge, and I can hear it. I can hear the humming. She stopped when she saw me, her eyes widening in fear and recognition. Sarah, it's all right, Elias said, his voice gentle. He knows. He's been up there. Sarah stared at me, a new terrible understanding dawning on her face. Then you're marked, she whispered. Just like my brother was. Your brother? I asked, my blood running cold. Daniel, she said, her voice cracking. He went missing 10 years ago. He was a teenager, always trying to prove how brave he was. Went up to the Blackwood place on a dare. He never came back. Her eyes filled with tears. His name is on that wall, isn't it? I could only nod, the weight of her decade-old grief settling on me. Before anyone could say another word, a sound drifted from outside, faint but unmistakable. It was a melody, a handful of discordant, sorrowful notes, carried on the wind. The lullaby. It was no longer confined to the house on the ridge. She was reaching for me. The fog outside the store's windows thickened, swirling against the glass like a living entity. She was closing her trap. The sound of the lullaby, thin and warped on the wind, was a physical thing. It slid under the door and through the window frames, a needle of ice-cold dread injecting itself directly into my veins. Outside, the world vanished. The fog pressed against the glass of the general store, no longer a weather phenomenon but a solid, churning wall of white, isolating the three of us in a tiny bubble of flickering light. Sarah let out a small, choked gasp, backing away from the windows as if they might break. She knows you're here, Elias said, his voice grim. He moved with a newfound purpose, pulling down the faded green shade over the front window and locking the door with a heavy, final-sounding thunk of the deadbolt. She's tasting the air, so to speak. Now that she has your scent, she won't let go. The fog is the least of it. It's her hunting ground. So what do we do? I demanded, my voice tight with a rising panic. We can't just stay here and wait for her to break in. She won't break in, Sarah whispered, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She doesn't have to. She'll sing. She'll sing until you want to sleep more than you want to live. She'll sing until you open the door for her yourself. That's what the stories say. The stories are right, Elias confirmed, turning away from the door. His watery eyes were hard, focused. But they don't tell the whole tale. Her power is strong, but it is bound by rules. Her grief is her anchor, and the house is her heart. But her influence wanes on consecrated ground. He looked from me to Sarah, his expression serious. We have to get to the old chapel, St. Giles. It's on the other side of the town square. Through that, Sarah said, gesturing with a trembling hand towards the white-out conditions beyond the windows. We won't make it 10 feet. The fog, it confuses you. It turns you around. That's how it gets you. I know, Elias said. He walked behind the counter and began rummaging under it, the sounds of clinking glass and rustling paper filling the tense silence. Which is why we don't go unprepared. He emerged with two objects. The first was an old storm-battered kerosene lantern, which he began to fill with a steady hand. The second was a small, leather pouch tied with a string. He emptied its contents onto the counter. 3 small, flat stones of polished river rock. Each had a single, intricate symbol carved into its surface, a knot of swirling lines that seemed to have no beginning and no end. "What are those?" I asked. "Worry stones," Elias said, pushing one towards me and one towards Sarah. "But not for calming nerves. The symbol is a trapper's knot, an old folk magic. The idea is that it traps a spirit's attention, confuses its path. You hold on to this, you focus on it, and it helps you see the true road. It will help us cut through the fog's tricks. At least, I pray it will." He paused, his gaze settling on me. "And there's something you need to know, Ethan. The reason she's latched onto you so fiercely, it's not just because you trespassed. It's because of your name. You said my family had roots here," I prompted. "They do," Elias confirmed. "The Hayes family were the first to settle this valley, long before the Blackwoods arrived. They were the ones who cleared the land where the Blackwood estate now stands. There was a land dispute. A bitter one. The Blackwoods won, through means that were considered less than honorable. The Hayes family was forced out, and a curse was laid upon them by your great-great-grandmother, that they would forever be tied to the sorrow of this land, that one of their blood would one day return to witness the fruits of that sorrow firsthand. Ilara knows this. In her twisted, grieving mind, your presence is fate. You're not just another soul to collect, you're the culmination of a grudge a century old." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't random. I hadn't just stumbled into a ghost story. I had walked into the final chapter of my own family's dark history, a chapter one never even knew was written. Elias lit the lantern. It cast a warm, steady, golden glow, a stark contrast to the sickly fluorescent lights overhead. "The chapel is our only sanctuary. We move now, while we have the element of surprise. Keep the stone in your hand. Don't let go of it, no matter what. And no matter what you see or hear out there, you trust the lantern's light, and you keep moving. Is that understood?" Sarah and I both nodded, our faces grim. I clenched the smooth, cold stone in my hand, the strange symbol pressing into my palm. Elias took a deep breath, unlocked the deadbolt, and pushed the door open. The fog consumed us instantly. It was like stepping into a cold, wet nothingness. The world beyond a 5-foot circle around Elias's lantern ceased to exist. The lullaby was louder out here, a constant, insidious hum that seemed to come from all directions at once. We moved in a tight formation, Elias in the lead holding the lantern high, me and Sarah close behind. The town square should have been directly in front of us, but in the disorienting white, there were no landmarks. There was only the light, the fog, and the sound. "Don't listen," Elias grunted, his voice tight. "Focus on the stone. Feel the knot." I tried, but the whispers had already started. They slithered at the edge of my hearing, mixing with the lullaby. At first, they were just indistinct murmurs, but then they grew clearer. I heard a man's voice, faint and desperate. "Ethan, help me. I'm so cold." "Uncle Jeremiah?" I whispered, my steps faltering. "It's not him, Ethan," Sarah said sharply, grabbing my arm. "It's a trick. Keep moving." Her grip was a lifeline, and I forced myself forward. But the tricks grew more potent. From the fog to Sarah's right, a shape began to form. A teenage boy with her same dark hair, his face pale and lost. "Sarah," the apparition whispered. "I can't find my way home." Sarah cried out, a choked, heartbroken sound. "Daniel!" "It's not him, Sarah," Elias commanded, his voice a forceful boom that seemed to push the fog back. "He is at peace. This is just an echo, a lure. Trust the light." We pressed on, a tiny island of warmth and defiance in a sea of sorrowful malevolence. The chapel silhouette finally began to emerge from the mists, a dark, angular shape rising against the white. We were almost there. Just as a sliver of hope began to dawn in my chest, a figure stepped directly into the path of the lantern's light, blocking our way. It wasn't a shimmering ghost like the others. This one looked solid, real. It was my uncle, Jeremiah Hayes. He stood there in his familiar tweed jacket, his face etched with concern, his journal tucked under his arm. But his eyes were hollow, empty voids of shadow. "Ethan," the apparition said, and the voice was a perfect imitation of my uncle's. "You came for me, but you've gone the wrong way. This is a trap. Elias is lying. Come with me. I know the way out." He held out his hand. "Come on, son. Let's go home." The apparition wore my uncle's face, but the thing looking through his eyes was ancient and hollow. The hand it extended was a perfect copy of Jeremiah's, right down to the small, silver ring he always wore. But there was no warmth in it. It was a mannequin's hand, a carefully crafted piece of bait on a spectral hook. The lullaby had softened, weaving itself into the apparition's words, a subliminal message of trust and surrender. Come home. It's a trap. Let's go home. Ethan, no, Sarah breathed, her voice a desperate whisper beside me. Look at his eyes. Elias stood his ground, the lantern held before him like a shield. The golden light seemed to make the edges of the false Jeremiah shimmer and distort. She is feeding you a memory, Ethan, the old man said, his voice a low, steady anchor in the storm of deception. A lie made from your own hopes. Remember your blood. Remember the curse. You are a haze. You know the sorrow of this land. Do not add to it. My heart hammered in my chest, torn between the ghost of the man I'd come to find and the terrifying truth I had already witnessed. The stone in my hand was cold, a point of clarity in the confusion. The real Jeremiah had been a folklorist, a seeker of truth, no matter how strange. He would never have called this a simple trap. He would have called it a phenomenon. He would have been taking notes. This thing before me was a hollow imitation, a puppet pulled by the strings of grief. You're not him, I said, my voice finding a strength I didn't know I possessed. I took a step back, pulling away from the outstretched hand. My uncle is gone. You are just an echo, a cage. The moment the words left my mouth, the illusion shattered. The apparition's face twisted, the familiar features melting like hot wax into a mask of pure, incandescent rage. The eyes were no longer hollow voids, but burning coals of cold, blue light. The voice that came from its mouth was not my uncle's, but a horrifying chorus of dozens of voices, the lost souls of the wall, all screaming at once. You will join us. The force of the psychic scream threw me backward. The lullaby exploded into a full-throated, grief-stricken shriek that tore at the air. The fog churned, no longer a mist but a tempest of grasping, spectral hands and fleeting, agonized faces. The ghost of Jeremiah dissolved into the maelstrom, and the full, unbridled fury of Alara Blackwood was unleashed upon us. To the doors! Now! Elias roared, shoving us forward. He thrust the lantern out in front of us, and the golden light flared, acting like a plow, pushing back the shrieking spirits that clawed at us from the white chaos. We ran, stumbling through the grasping fog, the chapel doors our only hope. The sound was an oppressive physical weight, the combined sorrow of 50 years of stolen souls trying to crush us. We reached the heavy oak doors, and together, the three of us threw our weight against them. They groaned open, and we tumbled inside, into the deep, welcoming darkness of the chapel. I slammed the doors shut, the sound of Alara's shriek cut off with an echoing finality. The heavy iron crossbar fell into place, sealing us in. And then, silence. A profound, peaceful, and absolute silence. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint, clean scent of old stone and dry hymnals. The oppressive weight of the fog and the relentless assault of the lullaby were gone, as if they had never existed. We were safe. I leaned against the door, my body trembling, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Sarah had slid to the floor, her face buried in her hands, quiet sobs shaking her shoulders. Elias stood in the center of the nave, the lantern casting long, dancing shadows up the stone walls. Sanctuary, he breathed, his voice filled with a reverence that was almost palpable. She cannot touch us here. As my eyes adjusted, I took in our surroundings. The chapel of St. Giles was small and simple. Rows of pews, coated in a thick blanket of dust, faced a plain stone altar. Above it, a large, circular stained glass window, miraculously intact, depicted a simple white dove against a blue sky. The faint light of the dying afternoon filtered through it, bathing the altar in a soft, ethereal glow. After a few minutes of catching our breath, of letting the peaceful silence wash over us, Elias raised the lantern. This place is more than just a refuge, he said, his voice returning to its steady, instructional tone. It's an archive. The town's memory. The priest who ran this chapel, Father Michael, he knew what was happening up at the Blackwood place. He tried to fight it. He led us past the pews, towards a small alcove near the altar. There was a stone font for holy water, long dry, and a small wooden lectern. On the lectern sat a single, massive, leather-bound book, protected from the worst of the dust by a faded velvet cloth. It was the parish register. Elias opened it with careful, reverent hands. The pages were brittle, the ink faded, but the script was clear. He flipped past pages of births, marriages, and deaths, his gnarled finger tracing a path through the town's history. He stopped on a page near the back, dated 50 years ago. Here, he said, his voice low. After Nathaniel Blackwood disappeared and Alara's condition worsened, Father Michael began making notes. He didn't believe it was just grief. He called it a spiritual sickness that had taken root in her, one that was beginning to infect the land itself. He pointed to a section of text. The script was more hurried here, the lines tight with urgency. Her power grows, but it is anchored to her sorrow, the entry read. She cannot be reasoned with, she cannot be exorcised, for her spirit is not a demon, but a mother's soul curdled by loss. Her spirit is bound to the objects that defined her love for the boy. I have seen his spirit, the poor child, trying to warn others away. He is as much a prisoner as she is a warden. To free the others, the boy must first be laid to rest. And he cannot rest while his mother holds onto his last toy, the tin soldier, which she keeps in a place of honor, a shrine to her grief. Find the soldier. Return it to the earth. It is the only way to break her anchor and quiet the lullaby. Beneath the entry was a hastily sketched drawing. It was a crude map of the Blackwood Estate's ground floor. It showed the kitchen, the foyer, the main parlor. But in the center of the parlor, there was a small X marked on the floor, right over the hearth. Next to it, Father Michael had written 2 words. Loose stone. We stared at the page, the implications of the words settling over us. It wasn't over. We hadn't won. We had just learned the rules of the war. We were safe in the chapel, but my uncle, Sarah's brother, and all the other souls were still trapped. To free them, to survive, we couldn't hide. We had to go back. A shrine, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. We have to go back into the house and find a hidden shrine. Elias closed the book, the soft thud of the cover echoing in the silent chapel. It is the only way, he said, looking at me, his pale eyes filled with a grim resolve. The only way to end this is to walk back into the heart of the storm. The silence in the chapel was a fragile shield, and we all knew it. We had the knowledge, we had the objective, but between us and that objective stood a house full of tormented spirits and a grieving, spectral warden of unimaginable power. Hope was a dangerous thing in a place like Hollow Creek, but for the first time, huddled in the dusty light of St. Giles, it felt real. It was a cold, sharp-edged thing, but it was there. A stealth mission, I said, breaking the silence as I stared at the crude map in the parish register. Get in, find the hearth, get the soldier, and get out. It sounds so simple on paper. Nothing about this is simple, Elias cautioned, his voice a low rumble. He was tracing the trapper's knot symbol onto a piece of scrap paper, his brow furrowed in concentration. We can't just walk in the back door again. She'll be watching that entrance. She knows how you got in before. Then how? Sarah asked. Her tears had dried, and in their place was a hard, brittle resolve that made her look older. The grief for her brother, Daniel, had been honed into a weapon. The windows are boarded up or too high. Elias looked up from his drawing. When I was a boy before the tragedy, I used to play with the Blackwood's groundskeeper's son. The main house has a root cellar. The entrance is outside, around the side of the house, hidden beneath a thicket of overgrown rose bushes. It leads up into the pantry, right next to the main parlor. It's our best chance. She won't be expecting us to come up from below, from the earth. We had a plan. The next few hours were spent in a tense flurry of preparation as the last of the afternoon faded into a long, dark night. While Elias meticulously carved 2 more of the protective trapper's knot stones from pieces of loose slate he'd pried from the chapel floor, Sarah and I searched the vestry and a small maintenance closet. We found a coil of thick, sturdy rope, a heavy iron crowbar, and 3 old, wax-caked candlesticks. It wasn't an arsenal, but it was something. Tangible tools for an intangible fight. As he worked, Elias explained his theory. Ilara's power comes from her sorrow, and sorrow is a creature of the night. It feeds on shadows and loneliness. Dawn is her weakest moment. It's a time of renewal, of hope. A new day is a promise that the pains of the night are over. Her hold on the spirits, on the fog, it will be at its most tenuous in the moments just before the sun rises. That's our window. We spent the night in the chapel, the 3 of us taking turns keeping watch, though we knew nothing could get in. The silence was a comfort, but it was also a heavy blanket, giving us too much time to think about what we had to do. I studied my uncle's journal, rereading his frantic last entry, trying to glean some hidden strength from his words. He had been a seeker of knowledge. I was now being forced to use that knowledge as a weapon. This was for him. It was for Daniel. It was for the boy with the soldier. Finally, in the deep, cold hours of the pre-dawn, Elias deemed it was time. The sky is turning from black to gray, he announced, his voice hushed. We move now. We each took a protective stone, the carved slate feeling cool and solid in our hands. Elias took the lead with a crowbar, and I carried the lit lantern, its golden light seeming so much smaller and more fragile now. Sarah, armed with a heavy iron candlestick, brought up the rear. We unbarred the heavy chapel doors and stepped back out into the cold. The fog was still there, but it had changed. It was thinner now, listless, its oppressive weight lessened. The lullaby was gone, replaced by a profound and eerie silence. The world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the sun. We moved quickly and quietly through the deserted streets of Hollow Creek, our footsteps echoing like drumbeats in the quiet. Every shadow seemed to hold a watching figure. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a pursuing footstep. The Blackwood estate loomed on its ridge, a black silhouette against the bruised purple of the dawn sky. It looked like a sleeping monster. As we approached, a cold wind whispered down from the house, carrying the faint scent of wilted flowers and damp earth. It was a warning. The house was not asleep. It was waiting. Elias led us around the side of the house, to a dense, thorny tangle of what must have once been a rose garden. Just as he'd said, hidden beneath the overgrown canes, were two slanted wooden doors, nearly swallowed by the earth. They were swollen with damp and held shut by a rusted iron hasp. It took all of Elias's strength with a crowbar, but with a final groaning crack of rotten wood, the hasp gave way. He pulled one of the doors open, revealing a flight of steep stone steps leading down into absolute, pitch-black darkness. The air that rose from the opening was cold and foul, thick with the smell of mold and something else, something metallic and wrong. "I'll go first," I said, my voice sounding thin in the open air. "Sarah, you stay right behind me. Elias, cover our backs." They nodded. Holding the lantern out in front of me, I descended the steps. The cellar was small and damp, with stone walls and a packed earth floor. Empty shelves lined the walls, thick with cobwebs that looked like burial shrouds. At the far end was a sturdy wooden door. It was unlocked. This was it. I took a deep breath, handed the lantern to Sarah, and put my hand on the doorknob. With a silent nod from Elias, I turned it and pushed. The door opened into a small pantry, and beyond that, another door, slightly ajar, led into the main house. We had made it. The stealth plan had worked. We crept out of the pantry and into a large, formal dining room. A long table, shrouded in a dusty white cloth, sat like a tomb in the center of the room. From here, a wide archway led into the main parlor. The first hints of dawn were filtering through the grimy windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the floor. In the center of the far wall stood a massive stone fireplace. The hearth. We moved into the parlor, our feet silent on the rotting floorboards. The room was filled with furniture, all draped in the same ghostly white cloths. It was colder in here, a deep, unnatural cold that sank into your bones. I approached the hearth, my eyes scanning the stones at its base. One of them, just to the left of the grate, was a slightly different color, with a small crack along its edge. The loose stone. My heart hammered against my ribs. We had done it. We had found it. "Okay," I whispered, pulling out the crowbar. "Let's finish this." As I knelt down, ready to pry the stone loose, a soft sound from the corner of the room made all three of us freeze. Creak, groan, creak, groan. Slowly, we all turned. In the darkest corner of the parlor, partially hidden by a tall, cloth-draped shape, was the rocking chair from the nursery. It was moving back and forth, its rhythm slow and deliberate. And sitting in it, her form coalescing from the shadows, was Alara Blackwood. She wasn't a vague silhouette anymore. She was terrifyingly clear, her face a pale, beautiful mask of eternal sorrow, her eyes empty voids that seemed to drink the very light from the room. She wasn't screaming or shrieking. She was perfectly still, except for the gentle rocking. She looked directly at us, and a faint, sad smile touched her lips. She had been waiting for us all along. The quiet hum of the rocking chair was the only sound in the universe. Alara Blackwood watched us, not with anger, but with a deep, bottomless sorrow that was somehow more terrifying. Her sad smile was an accusation, a judgment, a welcome home. She had not been surprised by our arrival. She had been expecting it. Our stealthy infiltration, our carefully laid plans, had been nothing more than the scurrying of mice in the walls of her dollhouse. With a thought, she sealed the trap. The pantry door behind us slammed shut with a crack of splintering wood. The heavy front door of the parlor boomed, its deadbolt sliding home with a deafening metallic clang. The first rays of dawn, which had offered a sliver of hope, were snuffed out as thick, spectral frost instantly bloomed across the window panes, plunging the room into a cold, gray twilight. We were locked inside the heart of the monster. "You have come so far," Alara's voice whispered, seeming to come from every corner of the room at once. It was not the shriek from the fog, but a soft, melodic, and heartbreakingly beautiful sound. so far to join our family." As she spoke, the white cloths covering the furniture throughout the parlor began to stir, to billow, as if lifted by an unfelt wind. One by one, they slid to the floor, not revealing dusty antiques, but shimmering, translucent figures. The lost souls. A dozen or more of them stood scattered around the room, their faces pale, their eyes vacant. They were her silent, sorrowful audience. And standing among them, his form flickering like a weak flame, was a teenage boy with dark hair. "Daniel," Sarah breathed, a sound of pure agony. Near the hearth, another figure solidified. "My uncle, Jeremiah." He looked at me, his hollow eyes filled with a desperate, pleading expression. They were her puppets, her collection, brought out to witness the addition of new members. "You think you can take my son's memory from me?" Elara whispered, her smile fading, replaced by a look of maternal concern. "You think you can steal the one thing he has left? The one thing that keeps him here with me?" I knew I had to move. The hearth was only 15 feet away, but it felt like miles. I took a single, shuffling step forward, the crowbar held tight in my hand. Elara's attention snapped to me. "Ah, the haze," she sighed, a sound like winter wind through a rotted fence. "The blood that started all this. Your ancestors coveted this land. They tried to take it. And now you have returned to finish the job. But this land is mine. These souls are mine." As I took another step, the apparition of my uncle moved, blocking my path to the fireplace. "Ethan, stop," he pleaded, his voice a perfect, heart-wrenching imitation. "Don't do this. It's quiet here. The pain is gone. We can be together. She takes care of us." "That's not you," I gritted out, my voice shaking. "It's her words. Her prison." Simultaneously, the spirit of Daniel turned to face his sister. "Sarah? You came," he whispered, a tear tracing a path down his spectral cheek. "I'm so sorry I left. Don't be angry. Stay with me. We can't be separated again." Sarah was paralyzed, her face a mask of grief. The assault was perfectly orchestrated, a psychological masterpiece of cruelty. Elara was using their own love and loss against them, turning their greatest strengths into their most crippling weaknesses. We were going to fail. We were going to break. Then Elias moved. The old man, who had been standing silently, his face grim, took a deliberate step into the center of the room, positioning himself directly between us and Elara's rocking chair. He held his slate trappers not stone up before him. "You are a shade of sorrow, Elara Blackwood," he declared, his voice ringing with a surprising power that cut through her whispers. "You are a mother's love gone sour. But you are not the only power in this valley. You are not the only memory the stones hold." He closed his eyes. "Earth be my anchor, stone be my shield. Wind carry my voice, a knot I now wield." It was an old rhyme, a piece of the folklore he held so dear. It was a child's charm against the dark, but he spoke it with the conviction of a true believer. Elara stopped rocking. Her full, terrifying attention, a force of pure psychic gravity, swung from me and Sarah and focused entirely on Elias. "You dare speak the old words to me?" she hissed, her beautiful face beginning to contort. "You, who stood by and watched while my son was lost. You, who let your town forget." "We never forgot," Elias said, his voice straining under the pressure. A faint, golden light began to emanate from the stone in his hand. "We just learned to fear. Then I will teach you to remember," she shrieked, and the full force of her power, a tempest of spectral energy and raw emotion, slammed into the old man. Elias cried out, his body enveloped in a swirling vortex of blue and white light. The spirits around the room recoiled, and the apparitions of Daniel and Jeremiah flickered and dissolved. It was the diversion he'd intended. A sacrifice. "Now!" Elias's voice, strained and distant, echoed from within the vortex. "Finish it!" The sight of his bravery broke Sarah's paralysis. Her grief turned to rage. "Ethan, go!" she yelled, grabbing a heavy iron poker from the fireplace tools. She stood her ground, facing the swirling storm that was consuming Elias, as if she could somehow shield us from it. I didn't waste a second. I lunged for the hearth, jammed the tip of the crowbar into the crack beside the loose stone, and threw my entire weight against it. The old mortar gave way with a sickening crunch. I tossed the crowbar aside and pulled the heavy stone free, revealing a small, dark cavity within the chimney breast. The vortex around Elias pulsed, and Elara's scream intensified, a sound of pure fury. She knew what I was doing. I plunged my hand into the cold, soot-lined darkness. My fingers brushed against cobwebs, loose mortar, and then, something small. Something cold and metallic. I pulled it out. It was the tin soldier. rusted, bent, and missing most of its paint, but it was unmistakably him. The anchor. The key. The moment my fingers closed around it, the world ended. Ilara unleashed a psychic scream that was not sound, but pure, agonizing force. The windows of the parlor exploded inward in a shower of frosted glass. The trapped spirits shrieked and were thrown back against the walls like rags in a hurricane. From within the vortex, Elias's faint, golden light was extinguished with a final, heartbreaking cry of pain. I was thrown backward, the tin soldier clutched in my fist. I landed hard, the air knocked from my lungs. I looked up to see Ilara rising from her rocking chair. Her face was no longer a mask of sorrow, it was a canvas of pure, unrestrained fury. The house groaned and shuddered around us, and her voice boomed, no longer a whisper, but the roar of a goddess of death. You will not take him from me. The world became a symphony of chaos. Ilara's scream was a physical weapon that tore through the parlor, ripping dusty portraits from the walls and sending books flying from shelves like startled birds. The house groaned and shuddered around us, the death rattle of a structure strained to its breaking point by the raw, unrestrained power of its warden. I was on the floor, the tin soldier clutched so tightly in my hand that its bent rifle dug into my palm. The air was thick with a vortex of swirling dust, spectral energy, and 50 years of rage. Elias was gone. The golden light of his defiance had been utterly snuffed out. Ethan! Sarah's voice cut through the din. She was on her feet, her face pale but her eyes burning with a furious fire. She held the iron poker like a sword, using it to deflect a shattered piece of a vase that came hurtling toward my head. The hearth. The priest's journal said, "Return it to the earth." She was right. It wasn't just about finding the soldier, it was about finishing the ritual. But as I tried to push myself up, Ilara's focus narrowed on me. Her form, now a towering figure of wrath near the rocking chair, locked its empty eyes onto the soldier in my hand. Thief! Her voice boomed, shaking the very foundation of the house. You will not take my memory. You will not steal my son. The psychic pressure was immense, a crushing weight that threatened to shatter my skull. My vision swam. The chaos of the room faded, replaced by a vivid, horrifying vision. I was seeing through my uncle's eyes in his final moments. I saw him kneeling where I was now, prying the same stone loose. I felt his surge of triumph as he found the soldier, followed by the ice-cold terror as Ilara appeared before him. I felt his will being stripped away, his spirit forcibly torn from his body, his last sensation one of overwhelming, suffocating sorrow as the lullaby sang him into her collection. No! I yelled, fighting my way back to the present, shaking the vision from my head. The soldier in my hand felt warm. And as I focused on it, I could feel something else beneath Ilara's rage. A flicker of another presence. Faint. Frightened. A child's fear. It was Nathaniel. He was in there, a prisoner within his own memory. She's not protecting him, I gasped, looking at Sarah. She's smothering him. We have to set him free. I scrambled on my hands and knees towards the hearth. Ilara saw my intent and redoubled her assault. The spirits of the lost, no longer passive spectators, swarmed forward, their forms twisted and agonized. They were a wall of spectral bodies between me and my goal. I saw Daniel reaching for Sarah, his face a mask of pain. I saw Jeremiah standing before the fireplace, his arms outstretched, physically blocking me. You can't save them by fighting, I yelled to Sarah. It's not them, it's her. Sarah, her face streaked with tears, seemed to understand. Instead of striking at the apparition of her brother, she stood her ground, her gaze fixed on the raging form of Ilara. Let him go, she screamed, her voice raw with a sister's grief and fury. Let them all go. Your love is a prison. Your grief is a cage. Sarah's defiance, so pure and selfless, seemed to stun the apparitions for a fraction of a second. It was the opening I needed. I crawled past the ghostly form of my uncle, who simply watched me, his hollow eyes filled with an unspeakable sadness. I reached the hearth, the gaping, dark hole in the stonework. Inside, I could see the soft, dark earth of the house's foundation. This was it. The final step. Ilara's scream reached a fever pitch, but I knew just burying the soldier wasn't enough. Laying a spirit to rest required more than that. I held the small, tin soldier up in the chaotic, flickering light. I wasn't speaking to Ilara anymore. I was speaking to the boy. Nathaniel, I said, my voice cutting through the storm. It's over. Your mother loves you, but her sorrow is keeping you here. It's keeping all of these people here. It's time to rest. It's time to be free. You can let go now. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a single spectral tear rolled down the cheek of Alara's furious face. A look of confusion, of profound, heartbreaking loss, crossed her features. I pushed the tin soldier deep into the cool, soft earth inside the hearth. The instant the soldier was buried, the world erupted in silent, white light. The psychic scream from Alara became a sound of pure, agonizing release. The vortex of power she commanded folded in on itself, collapsing into her. The house gave a final, tremendous shudder, and every trapped spirit in the room, the men, the women, the children, was lit from within by a brilliant, peaceful radiance. The apparition of Daniel turned to Sarah, and for the first time, his eyes were clear. A genuine, loving smile touched his lips. He raised a hand in a silent, grateful farewell before dissolving into a shower of golden motes of light. Near me, my uncle Jeremiah looked at me, his eyes now filled with pride and gratitude. He nodded once, a gesture of thanks and release, and he too vanished. All around the room, the souls were coming apart, not in violence, but in peace. They were a flurry of fireflies, a galaxy of peaceful goodbyes, all ascending and fading into nothing. They were free. Finally, there was only Alara. Her power was gone, her collection scattered. She was no longer a towering figure of rage, but a small, translucent, grieving woman, kneeling on the floor where her rocking chair used to be. The ghost of a little boy, Nathaniel, shimmering and whole, appeared before her. He was no longer afraid. He reached out and placed a gentle hand on his mother's cheek. She looked at him, her centuries of rage melting away, leaving only the pure, untainted love she'd had at the beginning. Together, mother and son, they faded, not into motes of light, but simply away. The last residents were gone. The supernatural storm was over. But the physical one was just beginning. With the power that held it together gone, the house began to die. A huge ceiling beam splintered overhead, and the floor began to tremble violently. The curse was broken, but the Blackwood estate was now determined to be our tomb. The house was screaming its death agony. A deep, structural groan came from the heart of the building as the main support beam in the parlor ceiling, a massive piece of ancient oak, splintered and gave way. Plaster and century-old dust rained down upon us. "We have to get out. Now!" I yelled, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her away from the collapsing fireplace. "Which way?" she shouted back over the deafening roar. The path to the cellar was buried under a pile of rubble, and the front door was supernaturally sealed. We were trapped. But with Alara's power gone, the house was no longer a supernatural prison, it was just a physical one. A dying, wooden cage. My eyes darted around the room and locked onto the tall, formerly frosted-over windows. The spectral ice was gone, leaving behind only grimy, brittle glass. "There!" I pointed. "It's our only shot." We scrambled over overturned furniture and debris towards the nearest window. I used the iron poker Sarah had dropped to smash the remaining glass from the frame, then cleared the jagged shards from the sill. The ground was a 10-foot drop, but it was better than the alternative. "You first," I urged her. Sarah didn't hesitate. She climbed through the opening and dropped, landing with a grunt in the overgrown bushes below. I was about to follow when a section of the floor behind me gave way, plunging into the dark, musty earth of the cellar. The entire structure was coming down. I threw myself through the window, landing hard beside Sarah, my ankle twisting painfully underneath me. We didn't stop to check for injuries. We scrambled away from the house, driven by pure adrenaline, as the groans from within grew louder, culminating in a final, deafening crack. The roofline sagged, the walls buckled inward, and with a great, exhausted sigh of splintering wood and shattering glass, the Blackwood estate collapsed in on itself, disappearing in a massive cloud of dust that billowed up into the clear dawn sky. And then, silence. A silence deeper and more profound than any that had come before. It wasn't the oppressive, watchful silence of a haunted place. It was the calm, peaceful silence of an ending. We stood there, bruised, battered, and covered in grime, watching as the sun crested the ridge, its golden rays cutting through the dust cloud. The light touched our faces, warm and real. For the first time since I'd arrived, I could feel the warmth of the sun in Hollow Creek. I looked up. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The fog was gone. Every last wisp of it had been burned away by the morning. The cost of that sunrise hit me with the force of a physical blow. Elias. He had faced down a century of rage to buy us the few seconds we needed. His sacrifice was the reason this sky was clear. A deep, aching sadness settled in my chest, a companion to the overwhelming relief. Slowly, painfully, we made our way back down the ridge. The woods were transformed. What had seemed like a twisted, menacing labyrinth of gray was now just a forest, dappled in sunlight, alive with the sound of birdsong. The path was clear, the trees were just trees, and the air was crisp and clean. The blight had been lifted. When we reached the edge of the town, it was like seeing a different place. The dilapidated buildings no longer looked menacing, just neglected. And we weren't the only ones who had noticed the change. A few doors were open. People, the forgotten residents of Hollow Creek, were tentatively stepping out onto their porches, their faces turned up to the sky with expressions of stunned, tearful disbelief. They were seeing a blue sky for the first time in years. Decades, for some. We walked to the general store. It was just a building now, its flickering light extinguished by the morning. We sat on the front steps, the same steps where I'd first met the haunted woman Sarah had been, and the wise, doomed man Elias had been. He knew, Sarah said softly, her voice thick with emotion. He knew he might not come back. He said he was a keeper of memories, I replied, my ankle throbbing in time with my pulse. He didn't just keep them. He became one. A good one. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the town slowly come back to life. A man began sweeping his porch. A woman started to pull weeds from a long overgrown garden. It was a beginning. What will you do now? I asked her. Stay, she said without hesitation. She looked around at the awakening town, and for the first time, I saw a genuine smile on her face, a small, sad, but hopeful thing. Help them remember how to live without the shadows. Remind them what the sun feels like. What about you? My story is here, I said, patting my jacket pocket where I had tucked my uncle's journal. But my home isn't. I need to write the ending. Our goodbye was quiet. We didn't need many words. We had faced the impossible together, and that had forged a bond that transcended them. She helped me limp to my car, the sedan now covered in a thick layer of dust from the house's collapse. As I started the engine, I looked at the small town of Hollow Creek, a place that had almost been my tomb, and felt an unexpected surge of affection for it. It was a place of deep sorrow, but also of incredible resilience. I drove out of town, my car the first to leave in what I suspected was a very long time. I passed the faded, splintered welcome sign. Someone, probably one of the newly hopeful residents, had already been there. The 3 question marks after the word population had been crossed out. And underneath, written in fresh, black marker, was a small, determined number. 34. My uncle's journal sat on the passenger seat. He had come here looking for the end of a story and had tragically become part of it. I had followed him, and with the help of a brave old man and a grieving sister, I had finally found the last page. As I hit the main road and pointed my car towards the horizon, I knew one thing for sure. Some roads are best left untraveled. But sometimes, they're the only ones that lead you all the way home. 5 years. In the grand scheme of things, it's the blink of an eye. But for me, it was a lifetime. 5 years since I had driven away from a town gasping its first breath of free air in half a century. The book I wrote about it, The Hollow Creek Lullaby, had become an unexpected success. It wasn't the sensational ghost story the publisher had wanted, but a quieter tale of sorrow, memory, and the incredible resilience of a forgotten community. It told the story of Alara, Jeremiah, and Daniel. But most of all, it was a tribute to a brave old man named Elias. I had never been back. Part of me was afraid that the peace I remembered was a fragile illusion, that returning would somehow wake the ghosts I had worked so hard to put to rest. But today, on a brilliant autumn afternoon, the road was calling me home one last time. The drive was unrecognizable. The old, crumbling asphalt that led into the valley had been repaved. The gnarled, menacing trees that once choked the roadside had been trimmed back, allowing sunlight to dapple the road in warm, shifting patterns. My phone didn't lose service. In fact, a modern cell tower now stood proudly on a distant ridge. When I saw the new sign, I had to pull over. The old, splintered wood was gone. In its place was a professionally carved sign of polished oak. It read, "Welcome to Hollow Creek. Founded 1888. Population 42. The simple, solid number felt like the greatest victory of all. The town was reborn. The peeling paint and sagging porches were gone, replaced with fresh coats of white, yellow, and blue. Flower boxes overflowed with bright red geraniums. The general store was still there, but its windows were sparkling clean, and a new name was painted above the door, Elias's General Store and Cafe. Inside, it was bustling. People were chatting over coffee, the sound of laughter replacing the oppressive silence I remembered. A woman behind the counter turned as the bell on the door chimed, a cheerful, pleasant ring now. Her dark hair was shorter, styled, and the haunted look in her eyes had been replaced by a warm, confident light. It was Sarah. Her face broke into a wide, genuine smile when she saw me. "Ethan," she said, her voice full of warmth. I had a feeling you'd show up today. We talked for over an hour, catching up on 5 years of life. She told me how, after the story was published, a few curious historians and developers had come, not to exploit the town, but to help it rebuild. The descendants of families who had fled the blight generations ago slowly started to return, drawn by stories of a valley finally at peace. The town wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Sarah had been elected mayor 2 years running. She was a natural leader, her quiet strength now a source of comfort for the whole community. We owe it all to him, she said, nodding towards a simple, framed photograph on the wall behind the counter. It was a picture of Elias, younger, a gentle smile on his face. He kept the memory alive so we could have a future. Before I left, we drove up the ridge one last time. The winding dirt track was now a safe, graveled road. We parked where my sedan had once rested, facing the clearing where the Blackwood estate had stood. The ruins were gone. The townspeople had cleared the rubble, and nature had done the rest. The clearing was now a beautiful, sun-drenched meadow of wildflowers. In the center, where the hearth and its terrible secrets had once been, there now stood a single, large, smooth river stone. There was no long epitaph, no dramatic retelling, just a simple bronze plaque. It read, "For all who were lost, may you now be found. Rest in peace." We stood there for a long time, not in fear or sorrow, but in a quiet, shared remembrance. I thought of my uncle, Jeremiah, finally at peace after his long search. Sarah thought of her brother, Daniel, his spirit finally free. We thought of the boy, the mother, and all the others who had been trapped by a love that forgot how to let go. "Thank you, Ethan," Sarah said quietly, "for not letting their story be forgotten." "Thank you, Sarah," I replied, "for making sure there was a new story to tell." I drove away from Hollow Creek as the sun began to set, casting the reborn valley in hues of orange and gold. My uncle's journal was no longer on my passenger seat. It was safe at home, on a shelf of honor. I didn't look back this time. I didn't need to. I knew that what I was leaving behind was not a place of ghosts and curses, but a small, quiet town that had faced its darkness and had chosen to step into the light. The lullaby was finally over. The silence that followed was peace.